So potentially a political lifeline for the main opposition People's Democratic Party and its presidential candidate Atiku Abubakar, after a court in Illinois ordered the Chicago State University to turn over all records relating to Mr. TInubu to Atiku Abubakar within 2 days. Or maybe it isn't quite a lifeline, because Chicago State University had already confirmed previously that Bola Tinubu did attend the university and graduated in 1979 with a bachelor's degree. So given that, why is Atiku Abubakar still pushing for President Tinubu's election to be nullified over allegations he submitted fake documents to INEC? How is it likely to help the PDP's appeal against Mr. Tinubu's victory at the Supreme Court? And how close does it bring the opposition to their goal of exerting significant leverage on the outcome of the 2023 presidential election? Could this development dramatically change Nigeria's political landscape? Could it be the deciding issue ahead of the much anticipated bucking of heads between the APC, the PDP, and the Labour Party at the Supreme Court? Could it be the opposition's pathway to power? Well, we'll find out by the end of the week when Chicago State University releases those documents. But as one APC chieftain, using a British expression, put it, just remember, when the opposition snorts, only hot air comes out, no flames. Well, for more on this, I'm joined now by a distinguished panel of current affairs analysts who will bring their depth and breadth of vision to all the subjects up for discussion today. Dr. Constance Ikokwu is a journalist, political affairs commentator, and a Rise News analyst. Baba Yusuf is a policy strategist, political commentator, and group CEO of the Global Investment and Trade Company. And Dr. Austin Maho is a lecturer and researcher with Nigeria's National Open University and is also the publisher of Daybreak newspaper here in Abuja. And he has the rather unfortunate luck of being in our off-site studio today, although hopefully he can hear me and we can all engage in a round table chat. Gentlemen and lady, thank you very much indeed for joining us, and in recognition of the fact that you're not with us in the main studio, Dr. Austin Maho, let me come to you first. Could this be a crucial moment in Nigeria's political history? I'm wondering what your assessment of how crucial a victory this is for Atiku Abubakar and the PDP in Chicago.
Well, thank you, Charles. Nice to be in the studio again. Even if I'm not in the main studio, but at least I'm in the studio and I can follow proceeding, accurately. However, based on your question, I don't think, when the story broke yesterday, this afternoon, there was celebration. But the question we should ask is this: what will be the effect if the document is released? What will be the effect? Does it have any consequential effect on the eventual outcome of the decision already reached without prejudice to the final decision as expected from the Supreme Court? Will it have any consequential effect? Certainly not. Certainly not. It's not going to, because I'm not a lawyer, but I've had the privilege of having a legal opinion, a legal expert weighing on the issue. And from all indication, look, the decision to be reached by the Supreme Court is not going to be affected by whatever document that the Illinois High Court is going to, Chicago State University, based on the Illinois High Court, the decision is going to release to the public. It's not going to have any consequential effect. If, in any case, it's going to be two ways. Either it affirms the record already in the public domain, or maybe it could disprove most of the document already put out there by the TInubu camp. If that be the case, what I see is that it will only put a moral burden on Mr. President, you know, not that it's going to compel him in any way to leave office. So at the end of the day, it may lead to agitation on moral grounds. And it could lead to maybe, in another instance, make the National Assembly to proceed against him on moral grounds. But that is going to affect, because what the Supreme Court is sitting on is what is already before them, the judgment of the Presidential Appeal Tribunal, or the Presidential Appeal Court. They are sitting on that decision. I don't think they're in a position to receive fresh document or any fresh document in relation to what has been decided on. They are sitting, a decision has been reached, so they are sitting on that decision. And of course, we do know that Atiku and Peter Obi have already filed grounds for appeal, which excludes whatever document will be presented maybe before the end of the week, like you said, from Chicago State University. I don't think it will have any consequential effect in regards to the Supreme Court's judgment.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed for that opening intro. And let me come to you, Dr. Ikokwu there, because I would imagine that contrary to what Dr. Austin Maho is saying there, that this goes beyond a moral issue. It's a constitutional issue. There's an issue of the legality of a submission under oath to INEC if that is found to be false. Atiku Abubakar, of course, has always argued that Mr. TInubu should not have been allowed to run for president because he had submitted what Mr. Atiku said was a forged document under oath in violation of the Nigerian constitution. What's your take on that?
Well, the starting point is that President Bola Tinubu's case or academic records has been under contention and litigation for a long time. You know, almost the whole of his political life, and this includes his primary school certificate, his secondary school certificate, and then the university degree. In this particular case, what I think that the opposition is doing is to see that they exhaust all available channels to show that there are questions to the integrity of his background or the background that the president has presented to the public. Yes, the first speaker mentioned that it might not affect the Supreme Court judgment or the Supreme Court verdict, but I suspect that part of the thing that's going to happen here, if these records are released and it happens that indeed he attended Chicago State University, okay, that's good for him. It puts paid to all the suspicions and rumors regarding his record from that university. But if it does not, if it turns out that he did not attend that university or something else happened, I think part of the thing is that they want to, as much as possible, bloody his image and his reputation. There are so many things that have been thrown against the president, or they have been thrown against the president, and this has happened throughout his political life. And yes, he is the president. He might win at the Supreme Court legally, but morally he carries around that burden. Morally, there is the lack of belief or believability in this person and in who he says he is compared to who he is presenting to the public. So I think these are the things that are going on at this particular time. And it's also a big news for the opposition party. Why? Because the camp of the president had tried to make sure or to fight against the release of this record. So the fact that the court in Illinois decided that it is important that this record be released, I think is a breakthrough for the opposition. Whether or not it impacts the Supreme Court is another thing, but it is a breakthrough for them nevertheless.
Well, let me come to you, Baba Yusuf, because we know that recently Chicago State University appeared to confirm that Mr. TInubu attended the school and graduated with a bachelor's degree in 1979. I mean, in that regard, do you wonder why Mr. Abubakar and the PDP have persisted in their quest to gain access to Mr. TInubu's records?
Thank you, Charles. I think why the opposition candidates are pushing forward to this level is that a court of competent jurisdiction within the United States of America, having taken this position, will be the last line of what I call validation or otherwise of the credentials of Mr. President vis-a-vis his degree that he earned in the Chicago State University. This, to my mind, will bring to rest the issue and controversy around the truth or otherwise of President TInubu attending Chicago State University and graduating. So from the perspective of unraveling or validating what is there as a truth is key to Nigerians, is key to the history, to the political history of Nigeria. And if affirmed or confirmed to be true, will further validate and give more credibility than it is to the presidency of President Bola Ahmed Tinubu. Further to that, to add my voice to its impact on the Supreme Court consideration. As the first and second speaker mentioned, it is elementary in law that matters that go to the Supreme Court will not be subjected to fresh evidences presented before the apex court. The court will consider all issues before it in line with the judgment passed by the Court of Appeal. That being said, if for any reason, contrary to the truth comes out as the fact with regards to the credentials of Mr. President, it will surely stir the hornet's nest within the polity. First of all, the moral issue on the legitimacy of Mr. President sitting with regards to the forgery case, which becomes a perjury issue, becomes a criminal issue on one part, beyond the qualification issue. Mr. President already is Mr. President. He's enjoying immunity as we speak as president. What will remain to be seen is how that will pan out with regards to his being an incumbent president. If for any reason it is, the deposition by the school, which I suspect will not be different from what they have come out to say. I don't foresee an American institution like the Chicago State University to come out with a contrary view from what they have brought out to the public, on their own independently, especially given the fact that this matter has been a thorny issue. In fact, the Nigerians and other interested parties had to force the Chicago University to come out to say, hey, these are the facts with regards to, the credentials of President Bola Ahmed Tinubu in our records. However, a court deposition will put to rest this issue going forward.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed for that. That makes a lot of sense, what you just said. Let me come to you, Dr. Austin Maho, still marooned as you are in our off-site studio. Obviously, listening to Baba Yusuf there and before him, Dr. Ikokwu, the reason we're following this so intensively is because if by some freak of circumstance these records confirm what Atiku and the PDP have been suggesting, it could have the sort of impact on Nigeria's politics that far outstrips anything we've ever seen before, couldn't it?
Yeah, certainly. Like the two other panelists have succinctly highlighted, it will have significant impact. And like Dr. Ikokwu said, I took note of that. Look, and like I highlighted earlier, it will only place a strong moral burden on the president who would have been guilty of perjury, lying to the public under oath, and presenting documents which is not a true reflection of who he is. That is, if at the end of the day, the ruling or the document released by Chicago State University is contrary to what they have already put in the public domain out there. And like I said earlier, it can only give grounds for this the National Assembly to proceed, maybe to proceed by taking an action of impeachment against him, to say, look, he's not a fit and proper person to be the president of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. Or there could be agitation in the public space, in the civil space, for him to voluntarily resign from office on grounds that, look, you have been caught to have lied because you've been caught in a lie, and consequently you are not a fit and proper person. You have a moral question on your integrity, so you are not a fit and proper person to preside over the affairs of 200 million Nigerians. That's as far as it goes. But like other panelists have highlighted, I don't think, in my heart of heart, I don't think the document we are expecting is from Chicago State University is not going to be significantly different from what is already in the public domain. So the agitation, the hope, the tension over what is to come, I don't think there's any need for it. Rather, I would like us to pay attention. There's a ruling based on America's FOI Act that a Nigerian investigating journalist was able to use American FOI Act to compel the FBI to release about a 250,000-page document on Mr. Ahmed Tinubu's activities in the United States, which is supposed to, the FBI have secured, a court has mandated the FBI to release those documents starting from October. And I think possibly that may be more damaging to his reputation, his person, than what we are expecting to see from Chicago State University, by the end of this week. Okay. I look forward to that rather than the expectation from Chicago State University.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed for that, and thank you to all of you. I mean, at the very least, as you've all said, this will rest the case and the lingering questions over the legitimacy of Mr. Tinubu's educational qualifications. You've all talked about the Supreme Court, so this leads logically and helps us segue into the appeals process. Two losing presidential candidates from Nigeria's main opposition parties have gone to the Supreme Court to challenge the dismissal of their cases against the victory of Bola Ahmed Tinubu as president in February's election. You may recall that an election petitions tribunal ruled in a unanimous decision earlier this month that both the Labour parties, Peter Obi and Atiku Abubakar of the People's Democratic Party, failed to prove that the election was flawed. The tribunal declared that the politicians could not establish the allegations of overvoting and voter suppression. The judges also said there was not enough evidence to support the cases. Well, Mr. Abubakar is asking the Supreme Court to nullify the judgment, saying it occasioned grave error and a miscarriage of justice by upholding Mr. Tinubu's victory. Through his lawyer, Mr. Atiku also faulted the court's use of what he called disparaging words, which he said evinced bias. In a similar move, Mr. Obi noted that the election court overlooked the facts in his case and failed to consider the weight of evidence he presented, thereby arriving at the wrong conclusion. No date has been fixed for the hearing of the cases, and our distinguished panel of current affairs analysts are still with me. Dr. Constance Ikokwu is a journalist, political affairs commentator and Arise News analyst. Baba Yusuf is a policy strategist, political commentator and group CEO of the Global Investment and Trade Company. And Dr. Austin Maho is a lecturer and researcher with Nigeria's National Open University and is also the publisher of Daybreak newspaper here in Abuja, and he is in our off-site studio. Let me kind of reverse the way that we've moved around this time and start with you, Baba Yusuf. Atiku Abubakar of the PDP and Peter Obi of the Labour Party have both filed their appeals at the Supreme Court. I'm wondering what you make of their case at that Supreme Court so far?
I don't envisage anything different from what the PEPC had ruled. Like we said earlier, or like I said earlier, much so the same thing said by the speakers. There's pretty much no opening for fresh evidences to be presented or fresh witnesses to be presented. And therefore, the Supreme Court is going to review the judgment vis-a-vis what was already submitted. In the case of inadmissible evidences, in the case of discredited witnesses, those are the things that they will look at. And then the technicalities around the judgment. Of course, also with regards to precedences. So based on that, and I have studied that judgment personally, my pocket knowledge of the law and strategy, I don't see any variance. Of course, without prejudice to the apex court, those are the ones that will decide. But I don't see pretty much something playing out different from the outcome so far.
Right, but of course, Dr. Ikokwu, the grounds of appeal are quite numerous. I mean, you've got Atiku lists 35, while Peter Obi lists 51, and some like Atedo Peterside, who was on this program last night, have said their support for the process. They support the process to go all the way to the Supreme Court, and not necessarily because Atiku or Obi, to get whatever it is they're looking for, but to ensure that damage is not done irreparably to the whole system, including things like the Electoral Act, which was supposed to create the environment for transparent elections. With some people seeing what has happened as a threat to those gains, do you think the Supreme Court will be able to tell us which bit of the Electoral Act is still valid and which are not, as Mr. Peterside suggested?
Well, I don't know if the Supreme Court will do that, but the point to note here is that after an election which was generally regarded as below par, and some even use the term shambolic, the ruling party asked the opposition to go to court to seek redress. So they have gone to court, and this is the final leg of that court case. And it is important that they exercise their rights, and this is what they are doing. In essence, at the end of the day, they can beat their chest and say that we did our best. We exhausted all channels that are available to us within the confines of the law. What this Supreme Court case or judgment will do is that, like I said, it gives them that opportunity to exercise their right. And then secondly, for President Bola Tinubu, it is important because if he wins, then it means that it gives him the legal authority, or it stamps the authority for him to carry on in office and not thinking that he will be yanked off the next minute. And for the general masses, it's also going to give them a bit of closure. And a couple of options they will have at that point will be to either quit or to support the president or to remain in the opposition and even become a stronger opposition. So this is a test on our democracy. We haven't had a case as much as this. 3 strong candidates running for presidency. This is the first in the history of Nigeria. And I think this case is going to be a turning point in the history of our country, when indeed it comes true.
Well, let me come to you, Dr. Austin Maho. I mean, you're a researcher, you're an academic, a lecturer, and you're also a journalist. You publish a newspaper. I mean, let's take one ground of appeal and get your assessment of its merit. Atiku, for instance, in his appeal, argues that the tribunal erred in law when it failed to nullify the presidential election on the basis of non-compliance with the Electoral Act, when, by evidence before the court, INEC conducted the election based on very grave and gross misrepresentation, contrary to the principles of the Electoral Act and based on the well-known legal doctrine of legitimate expectation, which demands that a public authority shall respect and apply its stated position in exercising its powers on members of the public. In other words, according to this legal doctrine, INEC, which is a public authority, can say one thing and do another. In other words, it's not allowed to do that. Briefly, what are your thoughts?
No, I believe it's a very strong ground of appeal, because the fundamental of the why many of us agitated for a review of the Electoral Act until it was signed in 2022 by former President Buhari, which was the act that was used to conduct the 2023 election, was electronic result. Electronic transmission of results. So Atiku and his lawyers, in their wisdom, are looking at the issue of substantial compliance. Did INEC comply with its own rule based on the Electoral Act or not? And many people out there will agree that, look, we expected that based on INEC own rule and what they put out to the voting public, was that INEC will conduct the result and transmit the result electronically to the IREF. Because it has been noticed over time that one of the weakest links in our electoral process is transmission of results. Because over time, you find out that between the polling unit and collation center, a lot of things happens. A lot of manipulation takes place. So the belief was that with electronic transmission of results from the polling unit to the IREF portal, it will take care of that gap which politicians have been manipulating over the years, you know, to influence results. But unfortunately, why the Electoral Act gave INEC the powers to be able to transmit results electronically, it equally gave them the ruling of the Presidential Appeal Court, it equally gave them the elbow room to decide whether to use it or not to use it.
Right.
But at the end of...
I guess the point really is the fact that they assured the public that they were going to use it, and then they went and did something else. I don't mean to interrupt you, but I've got to take a break. You're watching Arise Prime Time. Plenty more still ahead as we continue our chat with our panel of analysts. Stay with us. Welcome back to Arise Prime Time. I'm Charles Aniegolu, and with me our distinguished panel of current affairs analysts. Dr. Constance Ikokwu is a journalist, political affairs commentator and Arise News analyst. Baba Yusuf is a policy strategist, political commentator and group CEO of the Global Investment and Trade Company. And Dr. Austin Maho is a lecturer and researcher with Nigeria's National Open University and is also the publisher of Daybreak newspaper here in Abuja. He's in our off-site studio. Now let's assess President Tinubu's much heralded inaugural speech at the United Nations General Assembly in New York, in which, among other things, he emphasized the need for Africa to overcome the constraints of foreign exploitation and unlock its vast potential. And he talked about the supremacy of democracy against the backdrop of the resurgence of military coups in West Africa. Take a listen to some of what he had to say.
In Niger, regarding Niger, we are negotiating with the military leaders. As chairman of ECOWAS, I seek to help establish democratic governance in a manner that addresses the political economy challenges confronting that nation, including violent extremists who seek to foment instability in our region. I extend a hand of friendship to all of you who may genuinely support this mission for a democratic governance in that nation. Military coups are wrong. As in any titled civilian political arrangement that is, will perpetuate injustice. The wave crossing part of Africa does not demonstrate favor towards coup. It is a demand for solution to perennial problem. Let us dig it deeper. An outright exploitation from abroad have also exerted a heavy toll on our ability to progress. Given this long history, if this year's theme is to mean anything at all, it must mean something special and particular to Africa.
Bola Ahmed Tinubu there addressing the United Nations General Assembly, his inaugural speech. Let me come to you, Dr. Constance Ikokwu. What stood out for you in that speech? Did he tick all the boxes?
Well, he spoke in broad strokes as well as dwelling on specifics. And the key points from what I see, he talked about development in Africa, infrastructure investment. He also talked about Africa-West relations, especially with regard to exploitation and unfair deals. He talked about the very essence of the UN, United Nations, the body that is currently hosting everyone in New York. And he mentioned a couple of other things with regard to Niger and democratic governance and all of that. I think that the guys in Niger, Burkina Faso, Mali have moved on from the president. They probably were asking the president to concentrate on Nigeria as democracy and sort his own political problems out than coming to them. They formed a group, right? A group for three of them in order to march forward. With regard to the United Nations at the essence, I think it's good that he talked about that, because in 1945, when the United Nations was established, most African countries were colonies of the Western powers, and so they did not have a voice. And that is why the ongoing call for the reform of the UN by African nations and other countries to have a seat for Africa at the United Nations. So I think it's something that he might have to follow up on.
Okay, thanks for that. Let me come to you, Dr. Austin Maho, very briefly, because we're almost out of time and we need to move on to the final topic. What are the key takeaways for you from that speech, Mr. Tinubu's speech at the United Nations General Assembly?
Yeah, the speech has been highly celebrated. That was a good speech, but at the point I got confused whether he's speaking on behalf of the African continent or he's speaking on behalf of Nigeria. So on that note, he spoke broadly. He wanted to present himself as a leader of Africa as well as the leader of Nigeria. And whereas the speech in general is compact and try to capture the essence of the role of Africa. You know what, at a point he was talking about the Marshall Plan and the need for the West, the Western world, to equally have a Marshall Plan, as it were, for the development of Africa. Africa needs investment, and highlighted the problem of Africa in terms of the need for investment. Africa needs aid. It doesn't need aid. We need more trade to develop our continent. And of course, there's equally the issue of illegal miners, terrorism, proliferation of arms and all that. He tried to address all that. But in the beginning of his speech, there's also this attempt to pander to the whim of the West, where he was talking about the Nigeria economy, that the Nigeria economy is open, celebrating, to me, which is a false narrative, celebrating the removal of fuel subsidy and floating of the naira. But at the end of the day, I actually feel that no Westerner, no outsider is coming to solve our problem. Yeah. We should. Africa and Nigeria should be able to
that's a very come good home point. And
so let me move on
from there ourselves. Because I'm really pushed for time. And let me come to you, Baba Yusuf, because you are the person who runs an investment company. Do you think President Tinubu is making the right moves and the right noises that would show him off on the international stage as Africa's leader, and also as a president that you can trust to invest in his country, Nigeria, briefly?
I'm impressed by the speech, like a lot of others, Charles, and I must say that he is really selling. We saw this is riding on the momentum from G20 22 summit in India. The key points to take out there are good. The opening remarks were just pitches to rein in and gain, bring in the attention of people to Nigeria. But importantly for me, the entire conversation being compact is a Pan-Africanist message, and is riding on the tide of, rhetorics of the likes of President Ruto of Kenya, President Ramaphosa, President Kofi of recent. What remains to be seen is how African leaders are able to come back to put their houses in order. In this case, Mr. President, good job, assertive speech, then we come back home, put our houses in order, and do the needful.
Yeah,
Secondly, for the African continent
very
also,
briefly,
AU and ECOWAS to also put their house in order and put a united front to be able to achieve it.
You make a very good point there, because of course investors, as I'm sure you know, Baba Yusuf, running an investment country, come to a country that they have confidence in.
Absolutely.
So it goes beyond just getting a return on their investment. I mean, investors have to feel that there is law and order, for example, and that the judiciary, for instance, can be trusted not to wipe you out, not to mention other issues like the police infrastructure deficit.
And putting the house in order.
And so on, yes. Absolutely. But let's move on from this, because we've got very little time, because even as President TInubu was being celebrated abroad for his seminal speech, back home the ravages of insecurity were hitting hard. In one restive part of the country, the separatist hotspot of Imo State in the southeast, 8 people, including soldiers and members of Nigeria's Civil Defense Corps, were killed by unidentified gunmen. So how should the government deal with the lingering violence in the southeast, especially with governorship elections due in Imo State in November, and especially given that it also is an APC-controlled state? And with me, our distinguished panel of current affairs analysts. Dr. Constance Ikokwu is a journalist, political affairs commentator, and a Rise News analyst. Baba Yusuf is a policy strategist, political commentator, and group CEO of the Global Investment and Trade Company. And Dr. Austin Maho, who is in our off-site studio, is a lecturer and researcher with Nigeria's National Open University, and is also the publisher of Daybreak newspaper here in Abuja. And let me come to you, Dr. Maho. Of course, one of the key issues with regard to what we're talking about, and Mr. TInubu inviting investors to Nigeria, is security, isn't it? No one will invest in a country they feel is riven with insecurity, although obviously Nigeria is a big country, so they might decide to give a particularly restive region a miss.
Yeah, when you talk about investment, how much investment has flowed into the country in the last 10 years or even 20 years? How much investment has flowed into the country? It's small. It's because Nigeria has very weak institutions. Added to that is the state of insecurity in the country. And in my last intervention, I said something about this false narrative that floating of the naira and removal of subsidy has, in one way or the other, aided the economy. It's a lie. It has not helped the economy. When I listened to the exclusive interview granted by the deputy leader of U.S. Treasury, Mr. Wale Adeyomo, to your studio, our Rise Studio channel about 2 days ago. And what he highlighted was simple, that as long as there is volatility in Nigeria's exchange rate, nobody will want to invest in this country. There's need to bring some level of stability to the exchange rate market, in order for people who wants to invest in the economy to have that confidence to plan. But once that is not there, it creates problem for an investor. So we need to come back and work on our country to get the fundamentals right, to improve on security, to build institutions, not individuals. And that is the only way we can begin to put policy framework in place that attract foreign investors into the country. It's not just talking. We have to do the work. And the work is right here at home, not in the UN, not outside the country, not traveling to go and call investors to come. If we put the right, policy framework in place, we stabilize the naira, we stabilize the security situation in the country, of course the investors will come. You don't have to beg them to come. Money will always go, investment will always go to where it knows it can make profit.
Okay. That's a good point. And let me come to you, Dr. Ikokwu. Are you reassured that the TInubu government is showing early signs of having the will and the right strategy to deal with the big issue of insecurity?
Obviously, I think they have been making some moves, and particularly with Imo State that you have pointed out, where they had that recent crisis. I think when you look at Imo State, it is an example of the moral decadence and bankruptcy of the country, because the APC was so desperate to have a foot in the southeast region, and so what many people consider an illegality happened with the governor that is currently the chief executive officer of that state. And so that state has known no peace since he became the governor. So it's a crisis. The president, he has new security officers. Everybody hopes that they will be able to clean everything out and bring about some peace, not only in Imo State, but across Nigeria.
Okay, and Baba Yusuf, are you particularly alarmed with what is happening in Imo State, bearing in mind that crucial governorship elections are coming up there in November? So we're not just talking about unknown gunmen versus the security forces and the populace. I mean, we're also talking about the political violence and the use of thugs that we tend to see at every election. And all the indications are that Imo State will be something of a fight to the finish.
That's correct. I'm very, very alarmed given the fact that if the armed forces that are supposed to protect the lives and properties of citizens are the ones that are being set alight and ablaze in daylight, the way they are being is happening of recent and more frequently, I am alarmed. You talked about the will and strategy. Will, yes, I think President Bola Ahmed Tinubu has the will. What remains to be seen if he has the strategy, if there is a blueprint to deal with this fundamental issue. The critical success factor to turn around the socio-economic malaise in Nigeria is tackling insecurity, first and foremost. Any other thing will be a flash in the pan. Why? Because we already see how, even after the election in the last 1 month, the attack in Niger State and the takedown of the military aircraft and the decimation of military officers in Niger State, now in Imo, these things are continually happening, and we need to see a turnaround in the short term and a clear strategy to exit this malaise. Otherwise, we will be doing 2 steps forward, 1 step backward.
Right.
Charles, as a parting word, this has impacted on food security. In the northern part of Nigeria is the food basket of Nigeria and the West African sub-region. Farmers have gone to the farm late. Climate change is impacting. Danger is looming. Mr. President needs to have a critical focal point on our security apparatchik for us to move forward in any sensible way.
And on that rather depressing note, I want to say thank you very much indeed to all of you. Baba Yusuf, a policy strategist, political commentator and group CEO of the Global Investment and Trade Company. Dr. Constance Ikokwu, a journalist, political affairs commentator and a Rise News analyst. And of course, Dr. Austin Maho, a lecturer and researcher with Nigeria's National Open University and the publisher of Daybreak newspaper here in Abuja. Thank you very much indeed. That's it for this edition of Arise Prime Time. Join us again tomorrow. From me and the entire team here in Abuja, bye-bye and thank you for watching.